This is lecture 12A. And in this one, I just want to finish up a couple of points about the Dar al-Islam before I get into post-classical China. The first is, I talked last time about the idea of Dar al-Islam, this idea of the Muslim world being a unified whole, that everyone within Dar al-Islam shares this sense of morality and shares Sharia, etc. But that doesn't mean that Dar al-Islam was monolithic, because we see that, in fact, over history, several zones of inside Dar al-Islam emerge, and they're generally defined by language, although there are multiple ways you can split it up. But the first is the Arab zone, and initially Arabic was only spoken in the Arabian Peninsula. It was related to some other languages like Aramaic and Hebrew in that same area, but Arabic was only spoken in the Arabian Peninsula. But as Muslim armies conquered Egypt and Syria and then Persia and then North Africa, they didn't force anybody to convert to Islam, but people did start converting to Islam. And as I mentioned in the previous lecture, by about 1000, somewhere around half of the population of this Muslim empire had converted to Islam, which is to say over the first 250 years or so. And by the 11 or 1200s, the vast majority had converted to Islam. But one part of converting to Islam is that you should learn Arabic so that you can read the Quran, because the Quran is only the Quran in Arabic. And the prayers that you're supposed to say are in Arabic. And so people who converted to Islam generally learned Arabic. And because the government, the Muslim government, used Arabic, because it was run by Arabs, Arabic became the sort of lingua franca, to use a bad phrase, the standard language of the Arab Empire and Dar al-Islam. And so you see a zone emerge essentially from North Africa, from Morocco, all the way across North Africa through Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, and then up into Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and then the Arabian Peninsula, modern-day Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, etc., United Arab Emirates. And so that area became predominantly Arabic-speaking. So most of the population used Arabic as their first language, and even Christians and Jews in that area generally adopted Arabic because everybody else spoke Arabic. And so Arabic became the standard language. So you can speak even today of an Arab world in the Dar al-Islam or in the Muslim world. And it ends at the borders of Turkey and Persia. So the first zone then is this Arab world, Arabic-speaking part of Dar al-Islam. The second part is a Persian world, and this is the old Persian empires that we've seen already. And basically, it extends from the mountains just east of Mesopotamia all the way over through modern-day Iran. And this area of the world was Persian-speaking before Islam arrived, and certainly Muslims in this zone learn some Arabic to read the Quran, do their prayers, etc. But Persian remained the dominant language. And one of the interesting things that came out of this was this mixing of Arabic poetry and the oral tradition of Arabic recited poetry with Persian literature and poetry to create a really vibrant new, sometimes Arabic language, sometimes Persian language, literary forms that came out of the late Middle Ages in this Persian world. And in general, this Persian world includes some non-Persian speaking areas like Afghanistan and Pakistan over towards India. And they sort of form a cultural block within the Muslim world. Then there's a later addition, and this is, as I mentioned, beginning in the 800s, you began to see Turkish-speaking nomads moving out of Central Asia down into modern-day Iran, down into modern-day Afghanistan, and then over into Mesopotamia, and eventually they settled in Anatolia. And these Turkish nomads spoke Turkic languages. There's a whole family of languages related to Turkish. And so you can speak about a Turkish Muslim zone of Dar al-Islam after about the 1100s. By the 1100s or so, you've got Muslim Turks firmly established in Anatolia, and today, of course, have the country of Turkey. But you also had Turkic speaking, languages related to Turkish. You had nomadic Turkic speaking nomads in settling across a swath of Central Asia in the modern day countries of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, etc. And this was a separate sort of zone, cultural zone of Islam. And so what we think of as the Muslim Empire, and then after that the Ottoman Empire, which we'll get into later in the course, really had different zones. And at one point it was ruled by Arabs, and later it was ruled by essentially Turks. And the Persian zone was sometimes included and sometimes not included. And we'll see how that plays out. But then, of course, as I mentioned, there were other areas of Muslim culture that were entirely separate from the Arabic, Persian, or Turkish. In sub-Saharan Africa, this whole band across the southern edge of the Sahara Desert came to be dominated by Muslim culture. Now, this was separate from the North African Arab Muslim culture, although they were closely connected. And then Indonesia, as I mentioned, and India. India is an interesting case. There was massive numbers of conversions to Islam, and we'll see that there were some Muslim dynasties that emerged in northern India, but the population as a whole remained Hindu in India, so India is generally not included in Dar al-Islam. But anyway, I just wanted to fill this out because even today, in the American media, there tends to be a sense that the Muslim world is a bloc, but the Muslim world is not united. And even the Middle East, there's a profound break between the Turks and Iran and the Arab-speaking part of the Middle East. And so, we talk about the Middle East being Muslim, and the American media sort of presents it as, oh yeah, they're all Muslim. But there's a big break between the Arab world, which is Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., and the Persian world, which is Iran, and then this Turkish world, which is Turkey. They're all in the Middle East, but they have profoundly different cultures, even though they're all Muslim. So I just wanted you to all be aware of that. So now, in the next parts of the lecture, I'm going to go ahead and talk about post-classical China.